What kind of father returns the only milk his hungry baby has? In the winter of 1893, Jack Mercer walked into a small Montana store carrying his infant son against his chest and a dented tin in his hand. He had just lost his railroad job. At home, the fire was dying. If he kept the milk, his baby could eat. If he returned it, they might survive the freezing night. The customers watched him with silent judgment. The storekeeper offered no mercy. But standing near the back of the room was Clara Whitmore, the wealthiest widow in Helena, a woman who had spent 18 years hiding from her own grief. What she did next would challenge pride, power, and everything the town believed about love. Stay until the end. This story may change the way you see kindness. Like the video and comment where you are watching from. Clara Whitmore did not raise her voice when she stepped out from beside the tea shelves. She did not need to. The room changed the moment Milton Crow recognized her. His shoulders straightened. Even the men near the stove shifted their boots, suddenly aware that the wealthiest widow in Helena had heard every word. "Mrs. Whitmore," Milton said, "I had no idea you were still in the store. That much is clear." Clara approached the counter. A silver mourning pin rested at her throat. She looked at the baby, then at the dented tin in Jack Mercer's hand. The child's face was pale except for 2 feverish spots along his cheeks. His tiny mouth opened in another exhausted cry. Clara placed a gold coin beside Milton's ledger. "Clear his account. Pack 6 tins of milk, 2 bundles of firewood, and the warmest child's blanket you have." Milton stared at the coin. "Ma'am, this is far more than he owes. Then finding change should not trouble you." Jack turned toward her. His eyes were dark from sleeplessness, but there was nothing weak in them. "I did not ask you to pay my debt." "No. You asked him to take back your child's milk. My son is my responsibility. And at this moment your responsibility is hungry." His jaw tightened. "I do not take charity." Clara studied his split knuckles and the careful way he supported the baby's head. Even now, with half the town watching, he was trying to protect the last thing poverty had not taken from him, his dignity. "What work did you do for the railroad?" she asked. "Bridge carpentry, timber framing, repairs. Before that, ranch work, fences, wells, orchards. Then the supplies are an advance against labor." Jack glanced at the gold coin. "How much labor?" "1 day to begin with." Clara pulled on her gloves. "My carriage is outside. Where are we going?" "To your home first. Tomorrow morning you will inspect mine." She walked toward the door as if the matter had already been settled. Jack looked at the customers who had watched him choose between hunger and cold. No one met his eyes now. He lifted the crate and held his son closer. The wind struck him the moment he stepped outside. Clara's carriage waited at the curb, black lacquer shining beneath the snow. 2 chestnut horses stamped against the frozen ground. Her driver, Caleb Dunn, climbed down and took the crate. "I can carry it," Jack said. "I am sure you can," Caleb replied. "The question is whether you must carry everything at once." Jack hesitated before entering the carriage. The velvet seats looked softer than any bed he had slept in for months. His boots were wet and mud clung to the cracked leather. Clara saw his hesitation. The carriage has survived worse than snow. He climbed inside and sat near the edge of the seat with the baby beneath his coat. For several blocks they rode without speaking. Stone banks and hotels gave way to saloons, stables, and boarding houses. The road narrowed near the freight yards. Smoke flattened beneath the low winter sky. "What is your son's name?" Clara asked. "Benjamin." His mother called him Ben. The past tense remained between them. Jack looked down at the child. "Emily died 10 days after he was born." Clara's breath caught. "There was a doctor in Great Falls," he continued. "He arrived after the bleeding stopped." Clara understood. The bleeding had not stopped because Emily recovered. She kept asking whether he had eaten, Jack said, even when she could barely speak. "I am sorry. People say that when there is nothing else to say." That does not make it untrue. His eyes returned to her. Some of the hardness left his face. The carriage entered the settlement beside the freight tracks. Clara had seen the district from a distance. From behind glass, the roofs had looked small and gray. Up close, they looked temporary, as if one hard wind could scatter them across the prairie. The houses were built from packing crates, discarded boards, and flattened tin. Smoke leaked through roof seams. A woman stood outside with a pot beneath a broken drain pipe. Children played near the tracks in clothing too thin for the weather. One boy had wrapped burlap around his feet. "How many families live here?" Clara asked. "Enough for the town to need us, not enough for the town to see us." The carriage stopped before a narrow cabin with a roof bowed beneath old snow. Jack stepped down with Ben and took the crate. Clara followed. "You do not have to come inside," he said. "I know. This is not a place for you." Clara looked at the barefoot children near the tracks. "It appears to be a place for many people." The cabin contained one room. A narrow cot stood against the wall. Beside it sat a cradle made from an old produce box, its rough edges covered with cloth. A cracked iron stove occupied the opposite corner. There was no fire. Jack placed Ben in the cradle and began stacking wood in the stove. His movements were fast and practiced. Clara saw that the floor had been swept. 2 bottles stood upside down on a clean cloth. A single plate and cup had been washed and placed neatly on a shelf. The blanket on the cot had been mended until little of the original fabric remained. Beside the stove stood a chair with one leg missing. Painted pieces of wood lay among the ashes. He had burned the leg for fuel. Caleb set the crate beside the table. "There are potatoes and salt pork in the carriage," Clara said. "Bring them in." "No," Jack said. "The cupboards are empty. The milk and wood are enough. They are not enough for you. My hunger is not your concern. It is if you are expected to work tomorrow." Jack rose from the stove. "We agreed to an advance for labor. You have not given me labor yet. You will inspect the property in the morning, and if there is no work I can do, then the account ends with today. Then the potatoes go back." Clara felt irritation rise. "You are remarkably difficult to help, Mr. Mercer. I did not ask to be helped." "No. You asked a storekeeper to exchange your child's food for firewood." The words came out colder than she intended. Jack's face changed. "I asked because I had nothing left to sell. I sold my tools except for the hammer. I sold Emily's trunk. I asked 3 crews for work this morning." He looked toward Ben. "So I chose the cold because a hungry child can still cry. A frozen one cannot." The first crackle of firewood filled the room. "I know exactly what my son needs," Jack said. Clara removed one glove. Her fingers were trembling. "I believe you." He looked back at her. "The potatoes can remain in the carriage. Tomorrow at 9, come to the north gate of my estate. Inspect the work. If it is unsuitable, you may leave owing me nothing. And the milk 1 day's advance as we agreed." Jack nodded once. No gratitude, no apology. Only terms both of them could endure. As the carriage pulled away, Clara looked back through the glass. Jack stood in the doorway with Ben against his shoulder. Firelight had begun to move across the cabin walls. The child was no longer crying. The Whitmore mansion sat on the western ridge above Helena. By the time Clara arrived, lamps glowed in every front window, though no guest was expected. Warm air surrounded her, scented with beeswax cedar and roast beef. Fires burned in the entrance hall, drawing room, and bedroom. The house contained more warmth than any family could use. Clara entered the dining room. The table could seat 20 people. One place had been set at the far end. A servant poured soup. Clara lifted the spoon and saw Jack's empty shelf, the burned chair leg, and the careful bottles on the cloth. After 2 bites, she pushed the bowl away. "I am not hungry." She went upstairs alone. At the end of the eastern corridor stood a door that had not been opened in 18 years. Clara kept the key in a drawer beside her bed. That night she retrieved it. The lock resisted before giving with a small metallic click. The room smelled of cedar and old paper. A child's coat hung behind the door. Wooden soldiers stood along the mantel. A painted horse rested beneath the window, one wheel missing. On the wall hung a drawing in blue pencil. 3 figures stood beneath a crooked yellow sun. Clara touched the smallest figure. Owen had drawn himself between his mother and father. He had been 7 when the winter sickness came. At first the doctor called it a cold, then pneumonia. Then he stopped naming it and began speaking in quiet sentences outside the bedroom. Clara sat beside Owen through 3 nights. On the final night he asked whether spring would arrive soon. She promised it would. He died before sunrise. Clara sat on the edge of the small bed. For years she had protected this room from dust visiting children and time itself. Nothing had been moved because movement felt like betrayal. Now another child's cry had entered the silence she had built around Owen. "You are not being replaced," she whispered. The words sounded strange in the still room. She looked at the wooden horse. "But I cannot love you by pretending no other child exists." Her eyes filled. She did not wipe them immediately. Downstairs, she rang for Caleb. "I need the old north cottage opened," she said when he arrived. "The one near the orchard." "Yes. The roof needs work. The well froze 2 winters ago. Then we need someone who knows roofs and wells." Caleb's gaze moved toward Owen's open door. "Have the cottage inspected for immediate danger," Clara said. "Nothing more. I want Mr. Mercer to judge the rest himself." At 9 the next morning, Jack stood at the north gate carrying Ben beneath a clean but faded blanket. He had arrived early. Caleb led him along a snow-covered road through the pines. Clara waited beside the cottage in a dark green coat. Jack stopped when he saw the property. The cottage was larger than his cabin, but far from comfortable. One shutter hung loose. Snow had entered through a break in the roof. The barn leaned toward the east. Beyond it stretched an orchard of black twisted branches. "Well?" Clara asked. "I have not looked yet." He handed Ben to Caleb with visible reluctance. Jack walked around the cottage. He pressed his shoulder against the outer wall, examined the foundation stones, then climbed into the attic and tested the beams with his hammer. At the barn, he pushed snow away from the base. The foundation is sound. The roof bad. Not lost. He crossed to the well and dropped a stone into the shaft. The returning sound was dull, frozen near the top. The lower water may still be moving. Clara followed him into the orchard. Jack cut a thin branch from the nearest tree and bent it. It snapped. At another tree, the branch curved without breaking. He scraped the bark with his thumbnail. A faint green line appeared beneath the gray surface. "This one is alive. They all look dead. Dead wood breaks," Jack said. "Living wood bends." He released the branch. It returned slowly to its place. "How long to restore the property?" Clara asked. "To make the cottage safe 2 weeks. The barn perhaps a month. The well depends on the damage. The orchard will not answer until spring. I am asking what you think." Jack looked toward Ben. Caleb stood near the cottage, gently rocking him. "I think someone abandoned this place before it was finished dying." Clara folded her hands inside her muff. "I need an estate carpenter and groundskeeper. The work includes the cottage barn fences, well, and orchard. Weekly wages. Firewood from fallen timber. Milk for Benjamin included as household compensation. The milk is recorded as wages. Yes, not a gift, no. And the cottage provided while you are employed. If you dismiss me, you will have 30 days to leave unless you steal from me or damage the property deliberately. If I decide the work is unfair, you may leave without debt." Jack looked at the cottage again. "How long is the trial?" 6 months. He was silent, measuring the offer against every disappointment that had brought him there. "I want the agreement in writing. You shall have it. I choose how the repairs are done provided they are safe and remain within the budget." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You negotiate boldly for a man who returned milk yesterday." Jack met her gaze. "Yesterday is why I negotiate boldly today." For a moment neither spoke. Then Clara nodded. "Agreed." They signed the contract that afternoon in the mansion library. Jack read every line before touching the pen to paper. He requested that the value of Ben's milk be written separately. When Clara called the detail unnecessary, he replied that unnecessary details were often where powerful people hid their intentions. Clara amended the page. Jack signed his name in careful letters. Before leaving the library, Jack placed the pen beside the contract and looked around the room. Shelves climbed from floor to ceiling filled with books bound in leather. A marble clock ticked above the fireplace. "You have enough rooms here for 10 families," he said. Clara followed his gaze. "I once had a family." Jack heard the finality in her voice and did not press. At the door, Ben stirred in Caleb's arms. Clara stepped forward and adjusted the blanket beneath his chin. The gesture was careful, almost fearful. Ben opened his eyes and wrapped his fingers around one of hers. Clara stopped breathing. Jack saw the change in her face, but he said nothing. He simply waited until Ben released her. Then he took his son and thanked Caleb, not Clara, for holding him. The omission should have felt rude. Instead, Clara understood it as mercy. He had seen something private and chosen not to name it. He returned to the cottage before sunset. From an upstairs window, Clara watched Caleb deliver his tools and the supplies included in the agreement. Smoke rose from the cottage chimney before darkness covered the ridge. A lamp appeared in the front window. Through the glass, Clara saw Jack lift Ben above his head. The baby's hands opened toward the light, and even across the distance she could imagine his laughter. Behind her, the mansion stretched through room after empty room. Before her, one damaged cottage glowed beneath the winter sky. Clara rested her palm against the cold window. In the orchard below, the living branches bent beneath the snow and did not break. By morning, the snow had settled into a pale silence over the north ridge. Jack was already outside before sunrise. Clara saw him from the mansion window, a dark figure moving between the cottage and barn with a lantern in one hand and his hammer in the other. Ben slept in a wooden box near the cottage door, wrapped beneath 2 blankets and sheltered from the wind by a wall of stacked firewood. Jack had repaired the box during the night. He had added curved runners beneath it so he could pull it across the snow while he worked. Clara watched him fasten a canvas cover above the child. He tested every knot twice. By breakfast, the sound of his hammer carried across the ridge. The rhythm was steady and unhurried. 3 strikes. A pause. 2 strikes. Another pause. The sound entered the mansion through its thick windows and filled rooms that had been quiet for years. Clara found herself listening for it. After breakfast, she put on her coat and walked toward the cottage. She told herself she was inspecting the work. Jack stood inside the barn on a ladder he had built from salvaged boards. One end of a rope was tied around his waist. The other was secured to a support post. Ben rested nearby in the wooden cradle, his face barely visible beneath a wool cap. Jack drove a wooden brace into place, then leaned his weight against it. The barn groaned. Clara stopped at the doorway. Should it make that sound? Jack looked down. It has been making that sound for years. That does not answer my question. It should complain less when I am finished. He climbed down and examined the beam from below. Clara looked around the barn. Broken tools had been sorted into piles. Rotten boards had been removed. Useful nails sat in a tin near Jack's boots. You have done all this since yesterday I could not sleep. Because of the work, Jack wiped sawdust from his hands. Because Ben could breathe. Clara glanced toward the cradle. The child slept with one fist beside his cheek. Jack followed her gaze. The cabin by the tracks had smoke coming through the wall whenever the wind turned. I used to wake every hour to make sure he was still breathing. His voice remained calm, but Clara could hear the fear beneath it. What did you do when the fire went out? I held him. Was that enough? No. Jack looked back at the beam. But it was what I had. Clara stepped closer to the cradle. Ben's blanket had slipped beneath his chin. She reached down and pulled it higher. His eyes opened. For one uncertain second he stared at her. Then his mouth curved into a small smile. Clara froze. Jack saw it. He smiles at anyone who is warm. That is not a flattering explanation. It is an honest one. Ben reached toward the silver pin at Clara's throat. She moved back before he could touch it. Jack's expression changed, but he asked no question. Instead, he returned to the ladder. "I need the north doors opened," he said. "The barn will have to breathe while I replace the damaged wood. You speak of buildings as if they are alive. Most things tell you what they need if you stop forcing them to remain quiet." Clara looked at him. Jack had already turned away. Over the following days, he worked from first light until the sky darkened. He removed the rotten section of the cottage roof and covered the opening with canvas. He repaired the chimney with stone taken from a collapsed garden wall. He cleared the path between the cottage and the well, then built a wooden frame above the frozen shaft. Each morning he lowered heated stones into the well. Each evening he listened for water moving beneath the ice. Clara visited every afternoon. Sometimes she carried account books and pretended to review estate expenses beside the cottage fire. Sometimes she brought a basket from the kitchen and insisted the food was part of Jack's wages. He questioned every item. Coffee household allowance? Sugar household allowance? Pie. Clara paused. Caleb requested that the kitchen test a new recipe. Jack looked at the pie. "The kitchen has made apple pie for 20 years. Then it requires continued testing." Jack accepted one slice. He returned the rest of the pie to the mansion before sunset. Clara found it waiting on the dining room table with a note written in careful block letters. "Ben cannot eat pie. Neither can I finish one honestly." She read the note twice. Then she sat alone at the long table and ate a slice. One afternoon, Clara arrived while Jack was repairing the fence at the edge of the orchard. Ben sat in his traveling cradle beneath a pine tree. Jack pulled a post from the frozen ground, examined the rotted base, and tossed it aside. "Whoever set that post had no respect for a straight line," he said. Ben made a soft sound. "I agree," Jack continued. "Either he was drunk or in love." Ben kicked beneath his blanket. "Possibly both." Clara laughed. The sound escaped before she could stop it. Jack turned. For a moment he only stared at her. Clara's smile disappeared. "What, nothing? You are staring. I had not heard you laugh. You have known me less than a month. Still true." He returned to the fence, but Clara noticed the corner of his mouth lift. She sat beside Ben. The baby watched his father work with complete concentration. Jack drove the new post into the earth. "How did you learn all this?" Clara asked. "My father had a small farm in Missouri. You told me you worked on ranches." "After he died." "How old were you, 14? Clara looked at his hands. "That is young to lose a father. It felt older at the time." Jack struck the post again. "My mother sold the farm. There were debts. I worked wherever men would pay me. And Emily, I met her in Kansas." His expression softened. "She worked in a boarding house kitchen. She burned every loaf of bread she touched." Clara smiled. "Yet you married her. She could not cook, but she could sing." "What did she sing?" "Mostly songs she did not know all the words to." Jack drove the post deeper. She would invent new lines whenever she forgot the old ones. Clara pictured a woman singing over ruined bread, laughing without embarrassment. Did she want to come west? She wanted a home with apple trees. Jack looked toward the orchard. She had seen a picture of one in a book. That was enough. For Emily, wanting something was the first way of making it real. He stepped back and tested the post. It held. Clara looked at the dark branches above them. "Do you think these trees can be saved?" "Some of them. And the others? I will know when I cut them open." The answer disturbed her. Jack noticed. "Not every tree can be brought back, Clara." It was the first time he had used her name. Neither of them mentioned it. That Friday, Caleb delivered Jack's weekly wages. The envelope contained $2 more than the contract allowed. Jack discovered the mistake after sunset. The snow had begun again, falling thick and slow across the ridge. He placed Ben in the traveling cradle, covered him carefully, and started toward the mansion. The walk took 20 minutes in clear weather. That night it took nearly 40. Clara was in the library when a servant announced that Jack Mercer was at the front door. She found him standing in the entrance hall with snow on his shoulders and Ben asleep against his chest. "You walked here in this?" Jack held out 2 coins. Caleb counted wrong. Clara stared at the money. "You crossed the ridge for $2. They are not mine. You could have returned them tomorrow. I could have spent them tonight." She did not reach for the coins. "Keep them as an advance." "No. For additional work." "You have not assigned additional work. Then consider them a gift for Benjamin." Jack's eyes hardened. "We settled that question in the store." Clara took the coins. Her fingers brushed his palm. His skin was rough and cold. She closed her hand around the money. "You are an exhausting man." "I have heard that before." From Emily Offen. For the first time, his smile remained long enough for her to see how it changed his face. Ben stirred between them. Clara stepped closer. "Bring him near the fire before you return." Jack hesitated. "He is warm enough." That was not a request. Jack followed her into the library. The fire burned low and bright. He sat in a chair near the hearth and loosened the blanket around Ben. Clara watched from the opposite side of the room. Jack placed 2 fingers against the child's neck, then touched his cheek. "You check his breathing even when he is awake," she said. "I do not mean to, but you do." Jack looked into the fire. The night Emily died, Ben slept for 5 hours without moving. I thought I had lost both of them. Clara sat down. "What did you do?" I held a spoon beneath his nose. A spoon to see whether his breath would fog the metal. He looked embarrassed by the memory. I sat there until sunrise watching that spoon. Clara lowered her gaze. After Owen became ill, I watched the curtains. Jack waited. The window was open a little because the doctor said he needed air. The curtains moved each time the wind entered. She pressed her thumb against her palm. I began pretending the movement came from his breathing. Even after he was gone, I watched them. The room became very still. Jack did not offer comfort. He did not tell her to forget. He simply remained where he was holding his son beside her fire. At last, Ben opened his eyes. He looked at Clara and made a soft, questioning sound. Jack stood. "Take him." Clara drew back. "He is comfortable with you. He has been comfortable with me all day. I might hold him incorrectly. You have held a child before." The words struck deeper than Jack intended. He saw the pain cross her face. "I am sorry." Clara looked at Ben. "No, you are right." She held out her arms. Jack placed the baby against her carefully. At first, Clara held him too far from her body. Her elbows remained stiff. Jack adjusted one arm beneath Ben's back, closer. Clara drew him against her. Bun grabbed the silver mourning pin. Her breath caught. A memory flashed through her. Owen sitting on her lap in the garden. Owen pulling at the same pin. Owen laughing when she pretended to be offended. Clara's body tightened. Jack reached for Ben. She turned slightly away. "Wait." Ben rested his head beneath her chin. The weight of him was almost nothing. The feeling was almost unbearable. Clara closed her eyes. Jack watched the fire. He gave her the privacy of not being observed, though he remained only a few feet away. Ben's breathing slowed. Clara stayed in the chair long after the storm eased. The next morning, she found the library fire cold and the chair beside it empty. A folded blanket rested across its back. On the mantel beneath Owen's portrait lay one of Ben's small wool socks. Clara picked it up. She carried it upstairs. For the first time in 18 years, she entered Owen's room during daylight. Dust shone in the pale sun. She opened the curtains. The room changed immediately. Colors returned to the rug. The blue pencil drawing on the wall became visible. The wooden soldiers cast narrow shadows across the mantel. Clara stood near the bed with Ben's sock in her hand. She had preserved the room so completely that nothing inside it could breathe. The thought frightened her. She crossed to the wooden horse beneath the window. One wheel had been missing since Owen was 6. She lifted it and carried it downstairs. That afternoon she brought it to the cottage. Jack sat at the table repairing a chair. Clara placed the horse beside his tools. "One wheel is missing. I can see that. Can you repair it?" "Yes." "When?" Jack examined the toy. "The chair needs to be finished first." Clara was not accustomed to waiting for anything she could purchase. She nodded. Then, after the chair. Jack studied her. Was it Owen's? Yes. He touched the worn saddle with one finger. "I will be careful." Clara looked toward Ben sleeping near the stove. "I do not want it preserved." Jack waited. "I want it repaired." That evening after Clara left, Jack found a piece of cedar in the barn. The wood was red at its center and fragrant beneath the dust. He carried it into the cottage and placed it beside Owen's horse. For several nights he worked after Ben fell asleep. He carved a new wheel for the horse first. Then, from the remaining cedar, he began shaping something smaller. A bird. Its wings were folded close to its body. Its head turned slightly to one side, alert and patient. Jack sanded the wood until it felt smooth beneath his thumb. He did not know why he was making it for Clara. That uncertainty stayed his hand more than once. Across the estate, Clara began making changes of her own. She instructed the servants to open the east corridor each morning. She sent Owen's winter coat to be cleaned. She moved one of his books into the library. The changes were small enough that no visitor would notice. Caleb noticed. He said nothing. A week later, a newspaper arrived from Butte with Clara's business correspondence. One article had been marked in pencil. The headline named Jack Mercer as one of several laborers who had spoken at a railroad meeting 6 months earlier. The article described him as disruptive, bitter, and dangerous to private investment. Clara read it twice. That afternoon, she carried the paper to the barn. Jack was fitting a new door into its frame. She held up the article. "Were you at this meeting?" Jack looked at the page. "Yes. You told me the railroad dismissed you because there was not enough work. I told you that was part of the truth. What is the rest?" Jack removed a pencil from behind his ear. "The Elk River trestle had rotten supports, and the crew reported them. The superintendent ordered us back onto the bridge. You refused. I did. You spoke to the other workers. I told them not to step onto wood that could not hold them." Clara looked at the article. "It says you encouraged unrest. The bridge collapsed 2 days later." Her eyes lifted. "Was anyone killed?" "No. The crew did not return." "Then why were you dismissed?" Jack set down his pencil. "Because the company can replace a carpenter more easily than it can admit a carpenter was right." Clara folded the newspaper. "You should have told me. Would it have changed the contract?" "It might have changed how I understood the risk." "To whom?" "To this estate." Jack stepped away from the doorframe. "There it is. What the part where money enters the room and decides it is the only thing in danger." Clara's face cooled. "My money employs every person on this property. Your money pays them. There is a difference." "Yes." Jack pointed toward the mansion. "Money builds the roof. People keep it standing. You are speaking to me as if I have never worked. I am speaking to you as someone who has never been ordered onto a bridge that might collapse because refusing could leave her child hungry." The words struck with enough force to silence both of them. Ben began crying inside the cottage. Jack turned away. Clara remained beside the barn door, holding the newspaper. "I defended you without knowing the full truth." Jack stopped. "You offered me work without asking for it. That is not an answer." "No," he said. "It is the reason." He went to Ben. Clara walked back to the mansion alone. She was angry with him for concealing the meeting. She was angrier because part of what he said was true. That evening, she sat in the library with the newspaper spread before her. The article had been written by a man whose publishing company received money from two railroad investors. One of them was Warren Blackwood. Clara knew the name well. Warren had competed with her husband for grazing land freight contracts and influence on the town council. After Thomas Whitmore's death, Warren had visited Clara with flowers and an offer to manage her assets. She had refused both. Clara folded the article and placed it in a drawer. The next afternoon, she returned to the cottage. Jack was repairing Owen's horse. He did not apologize. Neither did she. Clara stood beside the table. "Did you know the bridge would collapse? I knew it could. And you spoke because the company would not listen." "Yes." "Would you do it again?" Jack looked at her. "Yes." Clara nodded. "I would have dismissed you if you had said otherwise." His expression softened. "That does not mean I forgive you for hiding it," she added. "I did not ask you to. You rarely ask for anything. I asked Milton to take back the milk." Clara looked toward Ben. "And I am glad he refused." Jack fitted the new wheel onto Owen's horse. It turned smoothly. He placed the toy in front of her. Clara rolled it once across the table. The small wooden wheels made a soft sound. "He would have liked this," she said. Jack reached beneath the table and brought out the cedar bird. "This is for you." Clara took it carefully. "A sparrow." "Yes. Why they survive winter by staying close to whatever warmth they can find." She ran her thumb along the carved wing. "Is that what I am doing? I would not presume to tell you. That has not stopped you before." Jack smiled. Their fingers touched around the wooden bird. Neither moved. Ben laughed from his cradle. The moment broke gently rather than awkwardly. Clara carried the sparrow home and placed it on her desk. Within days, Helena began talking. A wealthy widow had housed a young laborer on her estate. She visited his cottage alone. She held his child. She had reopened her dead son's room. Facts became rumors, and rumors became stories. At the Helena Women's Civic Society, conversations stopped when Clara entered. Margaret Bell, one of the few women who had known Clara before Owen's death, joined her beside the tea table. "You should be more careful," Margaret said quietly. "With the tea. With Mr. Mercer." Clara set down her cup. "He is my employee. That is not what people are saying." "What are they saying?" Margaret glanced toward the other women. "That he is using his child to gain your sympathy. That he wants your land. That you have become attached to him in a manner that is not appropriate." Clara looked across the room. Several women lowered their eyes. "Did you correct them? I told them they did not know the circumstances. That is not a correction." Margaret's face tightened. "I am trying to protect you." "From what?" "From losing the respect you have spent a lifetime earning." Clara looked at the women in silk dresses, then at the snow beyond the tall windows. "They called me cold when I grieved." Margaret said nothing. "Now they call me foolish because I have stopped. You could lose friends." Clara lifted her gloves from the table. Then they were visitors. She left before the meeting began. When she returned to the mansion, Caleb met her in the entrance hall. "Mr. Blackwood is waiting in the library." Clara removed her coat slowly. "Did he give a reason? No. Did he ask permission to enter? No." Clara walked toward the library. The doors stood open. Warren Blackwood waited beside her desk in a dark wool coat, one hand resting on a silver-topped cane. The newspaper clipping about Jack lay open before him. Beside it sat the cedar sparrow. Warren picked up the small bird and examined it. "He made this for you." Clara crossed the room and took it from his hand. "You are touching something that does not belong to you." Warren smiled. "Then we should discuss the man who made it." Clara placed the sparrow beside the lamp. "What about him?" Warren tapped the newspaper with one finger. "You have brought a dangerous man onto your property." Clara looked at the marked article, then at Warren's satisfied expression. Dangerous, to whom Warren settled both hands over the head of his cane. Warren Blackwood's smile did not reach his eyes. "To anyone who mistakes pity for loyalty," he said. Clara stood behind her desk with the cedar sparrow near her hand. Warren had entered her home without permission, touched something made for her, and spoken of Jack as if he were an animal brought in from the cold. She kept her voice even. "You did not cross Helena in a snowstorm to protect me from poor judgment." "No," Warren said. "I crossed Helena because poor judgment becomes expensive when it belongs to a woman with land." Clara looked toward the open library doors. "Close them." Warren turned as if he expected a servant to obey. No one moved. Clara walked past him and closed the doors herself. When she faced him again, Warren had taken the newspaper clipping from her desk. He held it between two fingers. Jack Mercer stood before railroad laborers and encouraged them to ignore company orders. He warned them that a bridge might collapse. He challenged authority. The bridge did collapse. That is not the point. Clara rested both palms on the desk. It is the only point that matters to the men who might have died. Warren gave a quiet sigh, the sound of a patient man speaking to someone he considered unreasonable. "You have always had a sentimental weakness beneath all that black silk. Do not pretend you know me. I knew your husband. You knew his business. I knew what he protected." Clara's eyes narrowed. Warren placed the article beside the cedar sparrow. The Whitmore name was built through discipline, contracts, loyalty. Men who understood the difference between their station and yours. Jack Mercer understands his station very well. That is why he refuses to kneel in it. Warren's mouth tightened. There are investors in this territory who consider him dangerous. Men who fear a carpenter must have very fragile fortunes. Do not be clever with me. The warmth left Warren's voice. He opened his coat and removed a folded document from an inside pocket. The paper had been sealed by a survey office in Missoula. Clara did not touch it. "What is that?" "A copy of the original Northern Boundary Survey. My attorneys have copies of every survey connected to this estate. Not this one." Warren unfolded the document and placed it flat. A red line crossed the northern ridge. It cut through the orchard, the cottage, and a portion of the pine forest beyond. Clara studied it. "This line is wrong. It is older. It is false. That is a serious accusation. So is entering my home with a map that moves my property line." Warren tapped the red mark. "The old survey places the ridge outside the final Whitmore claim. If challenged, ownership may return to territorial review. The land has been taxed under my husband's name for 26 years. Taxes prove use. They do not always prove title." Clara looked at him. "What do you want?" Warren smiled again. At last, they had reached the reason for his visit. "The railroad is considering a northern freight spur. The most efficient route crosses beneath that ridge. There are 2 other routes. Both are longer, and neither requires my land. That is precisely what makes yours valuable." Clara folded the map. "It is not for sale. I am not asking you to sell the entire ridge. Grant the railroad a permanent passage. Remove Mercer from the cottage. I will persuade the investors to abandon any title challenge." There it was. Not concern, not loyalty. A threat dressed as negotiation. "You knew about this proposed spur before Jack came here." Warren did not answer. "You were waiting for leverage. I was waiting for you to become practical." Clara walked to the fireplace. The flames shifted behind the iron screen. "Did you mark the newspaper article yourself?" Warren followed her with his eyes. "I thought you deserved to know the sort of man living on your property. You thought I would dismiss him before discovering what you wanted. I thought you would protect your estate." Clara turned. "From a father repairing a barn. From disorder. Is that what you call men refusing to die for your dividends?" Warren's cane struck the floor. "I will not be insulted in a house built by contracts my associates helped finance. This house was paid for years ago. Fortunes are never paid for. They are maintained." Clara returned to the desk and folded the survey into a smaller square. "You may tell your associates that the North Ridge remains mine, and Mercer remains employed." Warren stared at her. If a title challenge is filed, the bank may freeze every loan secured against disputed property. Your school plans, your estate improvements, your winter contracts, all of it could stop before a judge even sees the case. I have not announced a school. Warren paused. Only for a second. It was enough. Clara looked at him more carefully. You have been speaking to my household. I speak to everyone who matters. Then you have forgotten the difference between information and permission. She rang the bell beside her desk. Caleb entered almost immediately. Mr. Blackwood is leaving. Warren collected his gloves. At the door he turned. Your husband understood that reputation is a form of currency. My husband spent his life collecting things he could not keep. Warren looked toward the cedar sparrow. And now you intend to lose them for a man who owns nothing. Clara placed her hand beside the bird. You should be more careful when measuring what a man owns. Caleb opened the library door. Warren left without another word. The front doors closed behind him. Only then did Clara allow herself to sit. The room seemed colder. She unfolded the survey again. The red line crossed the cottage almost directly through its center. Jack was repairing a place another man already intended to take. Clara sent for her attorney before supper. Samuel Price arrived after dark with snow in his beard and ink stains on his fingers. He had represented the Whitmore estate for 12 years. Unlike Warren, he never treated Clara's questions as signs of confusion. He studied the map under the library lamp. I have never seen this copy, he said. Could it be genuine? It could. Clara watched his face. And could it be altered? That is also possible. What happens if he files a challenge? Samuel removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a handkerchief. The court could restrict new transfers until ownership is confirmed. Could the bank freeze my credit? If the loans are tied to the disputed acreage, yes. How long would review take? Months. Longer if Blackwood appeals. Clara looked toward the dark window. The cottage lamp glowed faintly across the ridge. What protects the people already living there? Samuel followed her gaze. A documented lease would establish lawful occupancy. For how long? As long as the lease remains valid. Could the land be transferred to the tenant? Not safely, while a title challenge is active. What if the right to purchase existed before the challenge? Samuel studied her. That would strengthen the tenant's interest. Clara stood. Prepare a 5-year labor lease for Jack Mercer. Samuel reached for his pen. Wages and housing. Yes. Add a purchase option. For market value. $1. His pen stopped. Clara. The labor is the price. A court may view $1 as a gift designed to frustrate a future claim. Then make the labor terms exact. Orchard restoration. Fence maintenance. Well repair. Soil improvement. Cottage reconstruction. He earns the land by completing them. Samuel remained silent. Can it be done? Yes. Then do it. Does Mr. Mercer know? No. Samuel placed the pen down. He may not accept. That is his right. And Blackwood will consider this an open declaration against him. Clara looked at the survey. It already is. The following morning she crossed the ridge before Jack began work. He was inside the cottage warming milk in a pan of water. Ben sat on the table in a wooden feeding chair Jack had made from scraps. Clara entered without removing her coat. Jack looked at her face. What happened? Warren Blackwood visited me. Jack continued stirring the milk. I assumed he would. You knew I knew men like him do not send newspaper clippings without wanting something. Clara placed the copied survey on the table. Jack read it while Ben slapped one hand against the wooden tray. What is the red line? Jack asked. A claim that the cottage may not belong to me. Jack looked toward the ceiling, then toward the orchard through the window. Does it? Yes. You sound certain. I am. Can you prove it? My attorney is looking for the original records. Jack folded the paper. What does Blackwood want? A railroad passage through the ridge. And me gone. Yes. Jack lifted the pan from the stove. The metal touched the table with a soft sound. When Clara frowned. "When what? When do you want us out?" "I do not. If he challenges the property, you could lose more than this cottage. That is possible. Then I will pack today." Clara stepped between him and the door. "No." Jack tested the milk against his wrist. "You are standing in front of a door, Clara. That does not change the size of the problem. You are not the problem. I am the excuse." He lifted Ben from the chair and settled the child against his shoulder. "Blackwood wants this land. He now has a reason to make the fight respectable. A widow being manipulated by a labor agitator sounds better in court than a rich man wanting a cheaper rail route." Clara stared at him. "You understand his strategy. I have worked for men like him. Then you should understand why leaving helps him." Jack carried Ben toward the cradle. "Leaving protects you. Do not make decisions for me. I am making one for my son." Clara followed. "And what does your son gain by returning to the freight yard? A father who has not destroyed the woman who helped him. You did not create this threat. My presence made it useful." Jack placed Ben in the cradle and began gathering folded clothes from the shelf. Clara caught his wrist. He looked down at her hand. She released him, but she did not move aside. "My husband spent years building walls around this estate," she said. "Iron gates, stone fences, contracts that made every acre feel untouchable." Jack held a shirt in both hands. "I kept those walls after he died because I believed they were safety." The cottage fire shifted. They were only another kind of emptiness. Jack's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "Emptiness is not the worst thing that can happen to a person. No. Fear is worse when it is allowed to choose. This is not fear. What is it, experience?" Clara looked toward Ben. "A man in a warm coat tells you to disappear, and experience tells you to obey." Jack's face hardened. "Experience tells me that men with money do not have to be right. They only have to remain standing longer than everyone else. Then stand longer. I have a child. So do I." The words escaped before Clara could stop them. Jack went still. Ben made a small sound from the cradle. Clara turned toward him. Her voice lowered. "I know he is yours. I know I have no claim." Jack said nothing. "But when I think of him sleeping beside those tracks, I cannot pretend it means nothing to me." She looked back at Jack. "If you choose to leave because this work is unfair, leave. If you choose to leave because you no longer trust me, leave. But do not walk into the cold because Warren Blackwood ordered you to make his life easier." Jack placed the folded shirt back on the shelf. For several moments, the only sound was Ben rubbing his hands against the blanket. "What are you planning?" Jack asked. "A contract. We already have one. This one protects your right to remain here. And what does it cost you? That is my concern. If my name is on it, it is mine as well." Clara nodded. 5 years. You continue the work already agreed upon. If you restore the land and complete the terms, you may purchase the cottage and surrounding acres. For how much? $1. Jack laughed once. There was no humor in it. "No. The dollar is symbolic. So is a chain when the door is already locked. It is not charity. It is land, paid for through 5 years of labor." Jack stepped closer. "You cannot call something wages simply because you are uncomfortable calling it a gift." Clara held his gaze. "And you cannot call every opportunity charity simply because receiving it frightens you." His jaw tightened. "I am not frightened. You are terrified." "Of what?" "That if you accept something generous, you will owe more than work." Jack looked away. Clara continued more softly. "The agreement will be written. Every duty, every payment, every condition. If you fail, you lose the purchase option. If you succeed, the land is yours. And if Blackwood wins, you remain a lawful tenant while the case proceeds." Jack walked to the window. Snow moved through the orchard in thin white lines. Emily wanted apple trees, he said. Clara waited. I spent years telling her we would have them when there was enough money, then enough time, then better work. His hand rested against the window frame. She died without ever seeing one. Clara looked toward the dark branches. Some of them are still alive. Jack's shoulders rose and fell. I want to read every word. You will. I want my own attorney to examine it. I will pay for one of your choosing. No, I will pay. You cannot afford one. Then I will ask Samuel Price to explain it without representing either of us. Clara considered. Agreed. Jack turned back. I have not said yes. No. But I will not pack today. It was enough. Clara called a public meeting for Saturday morning. She did not announce the purpose. She sent notices to the courthouse, the newspaper offices, the railroad union hall, and every merchant who held a contract with the Whitmore estate. By 10 o'clock, the town square was crowded. Workers stood in heavy coats near the courthouse steps. Merchants gathered beneath shop awnings. Women from the Civic Society remained together at the edge of the square. Warren Blackwood arrived in a polished carriage. He stood near the front with 2 attorneys and a newspaper editor. Jack waited beside Caleb, holding Ben beneath his coat. Clara stepped onto the wooden platform with Samuel Price. The wind lifted the edge of her black veil. She looked across the faces before her. Some were curious. Some were amused. Some had already decided she was foolish. I have called this meeting because rumors have begun replacing facts, Clara said. The crowd quieted. Mr. Jack Mercer is employed by the Whitmore estate as a carpenter and groundskeeper. He lives on the North Ridge under a lawful labor agreement. Warren's expression did not change. Clara continued. This morning, a new 5-year lease was signed, witnessed, and submitted to the county clerk. A murmur moved through the workers. Jack looked toward Samuel Price. The attorney gave a small nod. The agreement grants Mr. Mercer the right to purchase the cottage orchard and adjoining acreage for $1 after completing the full terms of restoration. The crowd reacted at once. Some laughed in disbelief. Others applauded. Jack's face tightened. Clara met his eyes across the square. She did not smile. The land would not be given. It would be built. Warren stepped forward. You cannot transfer property under disputed title. No title challenge has been filed, Samuel Price said. Warren ignored him. This is an obvious attempt to shelter land from lawful railroad development. Clara looked down from the platform. No railroad has presented me with a lawful proposal. You were offered one privately. I was threatened privately. The crowd stirred again. Warren's attorneys leaned toward him. Clara lifted a document from the lectern. I am also placing a portion of my railroad dividends into an independent trust. Warren's face changed for the first time. The funds will establish a school and day nursery for the children of railroad workers, miners, laundresses, domestic servants, and widowed parents. A woman near the rear covered her mouth. A man beside her removed his cap. Clara looked toward the families gathered along the square. I have seen fathers carry infants to dangerous work because there was no safe place to leave them. I have seen girls kept from school so they could watch younger children. A town that depends upon working families should not punish their children for being born into them. Applause rose from the workers. Warren struck the platform with the tip of his cane. You are giving away the Whitmore estate. Clara faced him. No. I am deciding what it is for. Those dividends belong to the Whitmore name. They belong to me. Your husband would never have allowed this. My husband is not here to allow or forbid anything. The sentence cut through the square. Warren's face darkened. You are being manipulated by a man who knows exactly how grief has weakened you. Jack moved forward. Clara raised one hand. He stopped. She looked down at Warren. If you believe a lawful employee and his infant son threaten your business, explain that concern in open court. Warren said nothing. Clara gathered her papers and stepped down. The crowd parted. As she passed Jack, he spoke quietly. "You should have told me about the school. You would have argued. I am arguing now. Then walk with me." They crossed the square side by side. Reporters followed until Caleb opened the carriage door. Ben reached toward Clara. She took him before Jack could object. Warren remained near the platform, surrounded by men who no longer looked as certain as they had when he arrived. The cost of Clara's decision began before the week ended. The First Territorial Bank withdrew the credit line intended for school construction. A lumber merchant returned Clara's deposit and canceled the order. 2 suppliers demanded immediate payment on accounts that had always been settled monthly. 3 servants gave notice. The Civic Society sent a letter requesting Clara's resignation. Margaret Bell delivered it herself. Clara read the first paragraph, folded the letter, and placed it on the tea table. "Did you vote for this?" Margaret stood near the window. "I did not vote. That was not my question." "No." Clara looked at her. "I thought silence was the position of women without choices." Margaret's face reddened. "You have no idea what Warren can do. I am beginning to. He owns newspapers. He influences the bank. Half the merchants in Helena owe him money, and the other half, they are afraid they might." Clara stood. "Are you?" Margaret looked toward the cedar sparrow on Clara's desk. "Yes." The honesty softened Clara's anger. Margaret picked up her gloves. "I do not think Mr. Mercer is using you. Thank you. I think you are using him to become someone you were afraid to be before." Clara said nothing. Margaret left the resignation letter on the table. That evening, Clara found an envelope pushed beneath the front door. Inside was a sheet of paper with 4 words written in charcoal. "Send Mercer away, or the child suffers." Clara read it twice. She carried it to the fireplace and held one corner above the flame. The paper blackened. Jack entered the library before it had burned completely. He had come to discuss the canceled lumber order. His eyes fell to the word still visible among the flames. "The child suffers." Jack crossed the room and pulled the paper from the fire with the iron tongs. "You should have shown me. You would have left. I might still." Clara faced him. "Then you would leave me alone with men who believe fear is authority." Jack placed the half-burned page on the hearth. "This is not about pride anymore. It never was. They threatened Ben, and I have doubled the guards. Guards can be bought. Then tell me what you need." Jack looked at her. The anger in his face gave way to exhaustion. "I need to know that when you decide something for us, you remember I am standing beside you, not behind you." Clara absorbed the words. "I should have told you before the meeting." "Yes. I was afraid you would refuse." "I might have. That frightened me more." Jack looked toward the fire. Clara moved closer. "I am not accustomed to asking someone to stay." "You did not ask." "No." The distance between them narrowed. The mansion had grown quieter since the servants left. Wind pressed against the library windows. A loose latch trembled with each gust. Jack walked to the window and examined it. "The catch is cracked. You are changing the subject. I am preventing the window from breaking." He removed a screwdriver from his coat. Clara watched him work. "You gave me the sparrow because they stay near warmth," she said. Jack tightened the final screw. "That is what I said. What happens when the warmth disappears?" He tested the latch. "It does not disappear." Clara waited. Jack turned toward her. "Sometimes it moves, and if you cannot find it, then you make it." They stood close enough for Clara to see the small scar beside his mouth. Jack lifted one hand, then stopped before touching her face. Ben cried from the adjoining room. Jack lowered his hand. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Then she walked past him and lifted Ben from the cradle. The baby settled against her almost at once. Jack watched them together. Outside, the wind rose. A telegraph boy arrived at the mansion after midnight with an official storm warning from the mountain station. Caleb read it beneath the entrance lamp. Heavy snowfall. Severe wind. temperatures falling below zero. Clara sent a servant to wake Jack. He was already at the barn carrying a lantern through the dark. The canceled lumber shipment had included 2 oak beams meant for the cottage roof. Jack climbed into the attic and pressed one hand against the oldest support. The wood gave a low groan. Caleb stood below him. "Will it hold?" Jack looked toward the mountain clouds spreading across the sky. It should hold an ordinary storm. The first hard gust struck the cottage walls. Snow began to fall through the darkness. Caleb raised his lantern, and if this one is not ordinary, Jack placed both hands against the weakened beam. Above. Jack the roof answered with another long, splintering sound. He lowered himself from the attic and landed hard on the cottage floor. Caleb raised the lantern. How bad Jack looked toward the ceiling. Fine dust drifted from the beams. The center support has softened near the chimney. Can you brace it with the oak beams that never arrived? The wind struck the eastern wall. The window glass trembled in its frame. Jack crossed to Ben's cradle. The baby had awakened and was rubbing one fist against his eyes. Caleb followed him. The mansion has empty rooms. Jack lifted Ben and wrapped the blanket tightly around him. I know. Then bring the boy down tonight. Jack looked toward the open attic. The cottage was part of his agreement, his responsibility. Every board, stone, and nail represented the first place he had been trusted to restore rather than abandon. Another gust pressed against the roof. The wood groaned again. Jack pulled Ben closer. Give me an hour. Caleb frowned. For what? To secure what I can. Then I will bring him down. Bring him now. Return afterward. Jack glanced toward the storm gathering beyond the window. Snow moved sideways across the orchard, erasing the path even as they stood there. If I carry him down now, I may not get back. Then let the roof wait. Jack looked at the damaged beam. The decision should have been simple. It was not. He had spent too many years watching unfinished work become someone else's excuse to call him unreliable. He had lost jobs because he spoke, lost shelter because he could not pay, lost Emily before he could give her the home he had promised. The cottage was more than walls. It was proof that he could still build something and keep it standing. Ben began to fuss against his chest. Jack closed his eyes. Then he handed the lantern to Caleb. You are right. Caleb nodded toward the door. I will walk with you. No. Go ahead and tell Clara we are coming. Have a room warmed near the kitchen. You should not remain here alone. I need 10 minutes to gather his bottles and blankets. Caleb studied him. 10. Jack nodded. Caleb stepped into the storm and disappeared almost immediately. Jack locked the door behind him. He moved quickly. He packed Ben's bottles into the wooden milk crate from Crow's store. The dented tin rested at the bottom beneath folded cloth. Jack had kept it after the other tins were used. He did not know why. Perhaps because throwing it away felt too much like pretending the store had never happened. Perhaps because it reminded him how close he had come to failing. He placed extra blankets over the bottles and set the crate beside the door. Ben watched him from the cradle. Jack crossed to the stove and removed the iron kettle. The fire would need to be extinguished before he left. A single spark beneath a damaged roof could burn the entire cottage before the snow put it out. He poured water over the coals. Steam rose with a sharp hiss. The room darkened. Jack lifted Ben and fastened him beneath his coat. All right, he whispered. We are going to the big house. Ben pressed his face against Jack's shirt. Jack reached for the crate. A violent crack sounded overhead. He looked up. The center beam split near the chimney. The roof dropped several inches. Jack threw himself over Ben as plaster, and pieces of wood struck the floor around them. The eastern window shattered. Wind and snow exploded into the cottage. Jack stumbled toward the door, but part of the ceiling collapsed between him and the entrance. A burning piece of timber from the chimney fell into the wet ashes. The cottage filled with dust. Ben screamed. I have you! Jack coughed and turned toward the rear wall. The old root cellar entrance stood behind the pantry. He had cleared it during his first week on the property. The cellar was small, built beneath the frozen earth with stone walls and a heavy wooden door. It would be colder than the cottage, but safer than the roof. Jack kicked aside fallen boards and reached the pantry. The trap door opened with difficulty. Darkness waited below. He lowered the milk crate first, then carried Ben down the short ladder. The cellar smelled of earth straw and old potatoes. It held no fire, but the soil protected it from the worst of the wind. Jack set the crate against the stone wall. He wrapped Ben in every blanket he had brought, then packed dry straw around the child's body. He turned the wooden crate on its side to create a shield above Ben's head. Snow pushed through gaps in the cottage floor. Jack placed his hand against Ben's cheek. "Listen to me." The baby cried harder. Jack knew the words meant nothing to him, but he needed to say them. "You are staying here. I am going for help. I will come back." He pressed his forehead to Ben's. "I will always come back." Jack climbed the ladder. Before he reached the top, another section of roof collapsed. The cottage shook. The cellar door slammed down. A heavy beam struck above it. Darkness swallowed him. Jack shoved both hands against the door. It moved less than an inch. Ben cried below. Jack pushed harder. Pain shot through his right shoulder. The door lifted enough for snow to fall through, then dropped again. Jack climbed down. He searched the cellar walls by touch until he found the short iron bar he had used to pry stones from the well. He wedged it beneath the door. The wood rose slowly. Jack pressed his back against it and forced the opening wider. A broken board shifted above him. The iron bar slipped. The door crashed against his shoulder. He fell from the ladder. For several seconds he could not breathe. Ben's cry came through the darkness. Jack rolled onto his knees. His right arm hung uselessly at his side. He reached for the ladder with his left hand and climbed again. This time he forced the iron bar beneath the door and pushed with his legs. The opening widened. Jack pressed his head and one shoulder through. Snow covered the pantry floor. Broken rafters crossed the room. The front entrance had disappeared beneath the collapsed roof. He dragged himself into the wreckage. The wind struck his face with such force that he could not open his eyes. He crawled toward the shattered window. A jagged piece of glass cut through his sleeve. He did not feel it until blood reached his hand. Behind him, Ben's cries became faint. Jack reached the window frame and pulled himself through. Outside there was no path. There was no orchard. There was only white movement. He turned once toward the cottage. "I am coming back." Then he began climbing toward the mansion. At first he tried to walk. The snow reached his knees. Within yards it reached his waist. Wind drove ice against his skin. Jack lowered his body and crawled. He followed the direction of the fence, feeling for posts beneath the snow. Each one brought him several yards closer. His right shoulder burned. Blood from his arm froze against his sleeve. The mansion lights should have been visible through the trees. He saw nothing. Only white. He reached another post and wrapped his left arm around it. For one moment he rested his forehead against the wood. Emily's face came to him. Not as she looked near death. As she had looked in Kansas, standing beside the boarding house with flour across her cheek and a ruined loaf in her hands. "You are stubborn, Jack Mercer." He heard her voice clearly. He lifted his head. "So are you?" he said into the storm. The wind took the words. He moved again. At the mansion, Clara stood near the rear windows and watched the darkness. Caleb had returned alone nearly 20 minutes earlier. He said he was gathering Ben's things. Caleb told her, "You left them. He ordered me to prepare a room. You do not take orders from him. I took one because it was sensible." Clara looked toward the clock. "It is no longer sensible." A servant entered carrying another basket of wood. "The north path is gone, ma'am. The stable boys cannot see the first gate." Clara turned toward Caleb. "We need ropes." "Not yet. Ben is in that cottage. So is his father. Jack knows the ridge." The roof was failing. Caleb's face remained calm, but his hands tightened around the head of his cane. He said it should hold. He also said the storm might not be ordinary. A pounding sound came from the rear door. Everyone in the hall stopped. The sound came again. Not a knock. A body striking wood. Clara ran. Caleb reached the door first and pulled back the bolt. Jack fell inside. Snow covered his hair, shoulders, and eyelashes. Blood had frozen along one sleeve. His face had turned a terrible shade of blue. Clara dropped beside him. "Where is Ben?" Jack tried to speak. His teeth struck together. "The cottage." Clara gripped his coat. "Where in the cottage? The cellar." Caleb knelt and reached for Jack's injured arm. Jack pulled away. Roof came down. Beam over the door. "Is he alive?" Clara asked. "Yes." "How do you know I heard him?" When Jack looked at her, the answer was already too old. Clara rose. "Bring rope, lanterns, shovels, and axes." Caleb stood. "I will gather the men. There is no time. There is always time to avoid creating more bodies." Clara turned toward him. "Caleb." The word silenced the room. She removed her house shoes and pulled on her winter boots. A servant brought her fur coat. Jack pushed himself upright against the wall. "You are not going." Clara fastened the coat. "You came here for help. I came for tools and men. You found tools. You are not a man." "No, I am the person already dressed." Jack struggled to stand. His knees failed. Clara caught him beneath his uninjured arm. "You cannot make the climb," she said. "I am making it. You can barely stand. My son is under that roof." Clara looked at Caleb. "Find everyone you can. Follow as soon as the rope line is secured." Caleb handed her a coil of rope. "At least take Thomas and William. The stable is on the south side. We would lose 10 minutes reaching them. You may lose more than that in the storm." Clara tied one end of the rope around her waist. Jack took it from her and redid the knot. Too loose. His fingers shook badly. He fastened the other end around himself. Clara lifted an axe. Jack took the iron pry bar and a lantern. They stepped outside. The cold struck like a physical blow. Clara's breath vanished. Jack closed the rear door behind them. The mansion light disappeared within several steps. Jack moved first, following the fence line by touch. Clara stayed close enough to see the dark shape of his coat. Snow reached above her knees. Beneath it, the ground sloped unevenly toward the orchard. She fell once. Jack turned and pulled her up with his left hand. "Stay low." "I know. You do not." He leaned close so she could hear him. "The wind wants your balance. Do not give it your whole body." They continued. At the first fence post, Jack looped the rope around the wood. At the second, Clara's hands had begun to lose feeling. At the third, the lantern went out. They moved in darkness. Jack counted steps beneath his breath. 23, 24, 25. Clara could barely hear him. "Why are you counting distance between posts? What if one is missing?" "Then we keep counting." At 31, Jack dropped to his knees and searched beneath the snow. His hand found nothing. The next fence post had broken during the wind. Jack crawled farther. The rope between them tightened. Clara followed. The ground disappeared beneath her right foot. She fell into a drift and sank to her shoulders. Snow filled her mouth. Panic seized her. She tried to stand, but her boots found no ground. Jack pulled the rope. "Clara." She could not answer. He moved toward her on his knees and reached into the drift. His hand caught her coat. He dragged her free. She lay on the snow, coughing. Jack removed his outer coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "No. Keep it. You will freeze. So will you." Clara tried to push it back. Jack caught her wrist. "I have already buried one person I loved because help came too late." His face changed as soon as the words left him. He had meant Emily. Clara knew that. Still, the word remained between them. Loved. Jack released her wrist. "Move." They continued. The orchard appeared only when Clara struck one of the trees with her shoulder. Branches whipped above them. Jack placed his palm against the trunk and turned toward the ridge. "The cottage is close." A deep cracking sound rolled through the storm. Clara stopped. That was not thunder. No. They pushed forward. The cottage emerged as a black shape beneath the snow. Half the roof was gone. The eastern wall had collapsed inward. Jack stumbled toward it. "Ben." The storm swallowed his voice. He climbed through the broken window. Clara followed. Inside, snow covered the floor. Boards and rafters formed a tangled mound where the front room had been. Jack dropped beside the pantry. "The cellar is here." Only a corner of the door remained visible beneath a fallen oak beam. He began throwing broken boards aside with his left hand. Clara set down the axe and joined him. A nail tore through her glove. She pulled her hand free and kept working. "Ben," Jack called. For several seconds there was no answer. Jack stopped. His face emptied. Then a faint cry rose from below. Jack bent over the buried door. "I hear you." The cry came again. Clara pressed both hands against the beam. "We need to lift this." Jack gripped it with his left arm and tried to raise it. The beam did not move. He changed position and drove his shoulder beneath it. Pain twisted across his face. "Your arm," Clara said. "Push when I lift." He forced himself upward. The beam rose less than an inch before dropping. Jack fell to one knee. Clara looked around the wreckage. The broken fence rail Jack had used to brace the pantry wall lay nearby. She dragged it free. "We use this." She shoved one end beneath the beam. Jack placed a stone under the rail as a pivot. Clara leaned down with all her weight. The beam lifted. Jack wedged the iron bar beneath it. Again. Clara pushed. The beam rose higher. Jack forced a broken block of wood into the gap. The cellar door became visible. Snow had packed around its edges. Jack cleared it with his bare hand. His fingernails split against the ice. Clara dropped beside him and used the axe to break the frozen crust. Ben's cry weakened. "Talk to him," she said. Jack pressed his mouth near the crack. "I am here, Ben." The child answered. Again Clara said, "I am here." They cleared enough snow to reach the door handle. Jack pulled. The door moved several inches and stopped against the beam. Clara looked at the narrow opening. "I can fit." "No, you cannot. The roof is unstable. So is your shoulder." Another rafter cracked above them. Jack looked toward the opening, then at Clara. "Keep one hand on the rope." She tied the rope around her wrist. Jack wrapped the other end around his waist. "If the roof moves, I pull you out." Clara lowered herself into the opening. The edge of the door scraped her coat. She turned sideways and forced her shoulders through. Darkness closed around her. Her boots found the top rung of the ladder. The cellar smelled of wet earth. "Ben." A soft cry came from the far wall. Clara descended. Her feet reached the floor. She could see nothing. She followed the sound with both hands stretched before her. Her fingers found straw, then a blanket, then the wooden crate. She dropped to her knees. Ben lay beneath the blankets with one cheek pressed against the dented milk tin. He was very still. Clara touched his face. Cold. Too cold. Her heart stopped. "Ben." No response. She lifted him from the straw. "Ben, open your eyes." Above her, Jack shouted her name. Clara pressed her cheek against the child's mouth. A faint breath touched her skin. She pulled him beneath her coat. "I have you." The words came out broken. She held him tightly. "I have you." Ben made a weak sound. Clara began climbing. One hand held the ladder. The other pressed Ben against her chest. Halfway up, the cottage shifted. Wood crashed above. Jack pulled the rope. Clara struck the side of the opening. Ben cried. The sound gave her strength. She climbed again. Jack reached through and caught the back of her coat. He pulled both of them into the wreckage. Clara rolled onto her side, covering Ben with her body. A section of ceiling collapsed where she had been moments earlier. Jack dragged them toward the broken window. The remaining wall leaned inward. "Move." Clara tried to stand. Her legs did not respond. Jack lifted Ben from her arms and placed him beneath his shirt against the heat of his chest. He pulled Clara upright with his left arm. They reached the window as the pantry wall collapsed behind them. Snow filled the cottage. Outside, the wind had grown stronger. Clara looked toward the direction of the mansion. There was no light, no path, only darkness and snow. Jack tied the rope more tightly around both of them. "Stay against me." Clara could hear Ben crying beneath his coat. The sound was thin but steady. They began walking. The return felt steeper. Jack leaned into the wind, pulling Clara beside him. She could no longer feel her feet. At the first tree, she stumbled. At the second, she fell. Jack raised her. At the third, she remained on her knees. "Get up." "I cannot." "Yes, you can. My legs are gone. They are still there." Clara looked at Ben beneath Jack's coat. "Take him. I have him. Leave me and take him." Jack stared at her. Snow collected in his hair and along his eyelashes. "I will not build a home by abandoning the person who gave us one. Jack, stand." He placed her arm across his shoulders. Clara forced one foot beneath her, then the other. They moved together. 10 steps, then 5, then 3. Clara's knees failed again. Jack lowered himself beside her. His breathing came in painful gasps. He shifted Ben higher against his chest. Then he turned his back toward Clara. "Climb on. You cannot carry us both. I carried timber heavier than you, not with one arm." Jack looked over his shoulder. "I did not ask what was reasonable." Clara wrapped her arms around him. Jack rose. For several yards he remained upright. Then his foot struck something beneath the snow. He fell forward. Clara rolled away before her weight could crush Ben. Jack checked the child immediately. Ben cried. Jack closed his eyes with relief. Clara crawled to him. "You are hurt. So are you. We need to rest. We stop moving, we freeze." He stood again. This time, Clara remained on her feet beside him. They found the broken fence line. Jack counted posts. At the second post, distant voices reached them. Lanterns appeared through the storm. Caleb led 4 men along a second rope. "Here." Jack tried to shout, but no sound came. Clara lifted one arm. The men reached them. Caleb took Ben first. He opened Jack's coat and wrapped the baby in a dry blanket. "He is breathing." Jack swayed. 2 men supported him. Another lifted Clara. They moved toward the mansion in a tight group connected by rope. The rear doors opened before they reached the steps. Warm light spilled across the snow. Clara crossed the threshold in a servant's arms. Jack entered behind her. The moment the doors closed, he collapsed. The great hall became a confusion of voices, blankets, hot water, and footsteps. Caleb placed Ben near the fire. A cook warmed cloths and pressed them around the child's body. Jack crawled toward him. "You need a doctor," Clara said. "So does he. He has one. And you, I am here." Jack reached Ben and placed 2 fingers against his neck. The baby's skin had begun to warm. His breathing remained shallow. Jack took the dented milk tin from inside his coat. Clara had carried it from the cellar without realizing it. The metal had left a red mark against Ben's cheek, but it had shielded part of his face from the fallen debris. Jack set it beside the hearth. Clara saw the dent Milton Crow had refused to accept. The same tin Jack had carried through shame and snow. The same tin that had rested beside his child in the dark. A doctor arrived shortly before dawn. He examined Ben first. "The cold was severe," he said, "but his heart is strong." Jack closed his eyes. The doctor turned to Clara. "Your hands are injured. Your feet may blister. You need to remain warm and still." Then he examined Jack's shoulder. "The joint is damaged, possibly fractured near the collarbone. Can it be set?" "Yes." "When can I work?" The doctor stared at him. "You carried a woman through a blizzard with this injury." Jack looked toward Clara. "I did not carry her the whole way. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." The doctor bound his shoulder and ordered him to lie near the fire. Jack refused the bed prepared upstairs. Clara refused hers as well. They remained in the great hall with Ben between them. The servants withdrew as morning approached. Caleb sat near the door, pretending not to watch. The storm weakened before sunrise. Wind became a low sound beyond the walls. Snow pressed against the windows until only the upper panes showed the pale morning sky. Clara lay beneath several blankets. Her hands were wrapped in clean cloth. Jack sat beside the hearth with Ben against his chest. His injured arm rested in a sling. The baby had stopped crying. His breath warmed a small circle of Jack's shirt. Clara opened her eyes. For a moment she did not know where she was. Then she saw Jack. "You stayed," she whispered. Jack looked down at her. "As did you." Clara shifted beneath the blankets. Pain moved through her legs. "I thought he was dead." Jack's face tightened. "So did I." In the cellar, he would not open his eyes. Jack reached across the space between them. His hand found hers. Clara's fingers were bandaged, but she closed them around his. "You came back for me," she said. "You came for my son. He is not only your son to me anymore." Jack looked at Ben. The child stirred but did not wake. Clara watched Jack's face. "I know what I am saying. I know. You once told me that receiving something generous frightened me. No. You told me that. Then you were listening. I listen when you are right." Clara almost smiled. Jack moved closer. The fire reflected in his tired eyes. "I cannot promise you there will be no more cold," he said. "I am not asking for that. I cannot promise the land. I have land. I cannot promise money. I have had money." Jack's thumb rested against the edge of her bandage. "What can I give you?" Clara looked at Ben between them. "Stay when staying is difficult." Jack lowered his head. His forehead touched hers. No one spoke. The morning entered the hall slowly. The silence around them was not the silence of Owen's closed room or Emily's empty place beside the stove. It held breathing. Ben's, Jack's, Clara's. 3 lives resting near the same fire. Outside the ridge lay buried beneath the storm. The cottage was gone. The orchard remained bent beneath the weight of snow. Inside the mansion, Jack's hand stayed wrapped around Clara's as the first clear light reached the dented milk tin beside the hearth. The first clear light reached the dented milk tin beside the hearth. By noon, the storm had passed. The world beyond the mansion windows was white and silent. Snow covered fences, roads, and rooftops until Helena seemed less like a town than a memory buried beneath winter. Clara remained near the fire with her feet wrapped in wool. Jack sat across from her with his shoulder bound tightly against his chest. Ben slept between them in a basket lined with blankets. Every few minutes, Jack leaned forward to check his breathing. Every time, Clara watched him. "You know he is still there," she said. Jack touched 2 fingers beneath Ben's nose. "I know. Then why do you keep checking?" He looked at her. "Because knowing and believing are not always the same thing." Clara understood too well. Near sunset, the first workers reached the estate. They came on foot carrying shovels over their shoulders. Some had tied rope around their waists to cross the buried road. Others arrived in wagons pulled by exhausted horses. Caleb opened the front doors and found more than 30 people standing in the snow. Men from the railroad crew, women from the freight settlement. 2 miners Jack had known in Butte, a laundress with 3 sons, a carpenter who had once argued with Jack over wages. They had heard that the cottage collapsed. They had heard Clara and Jack nearly died bringing Ben home. They had come without being summoned. A broad-shouldered railroad worker named Matthew Ross removed his cap. "We are here to clear the ridge." Caleb looked past him at the gathered crowd. "The snow is deep. So are we." By morning, paths had been cut between the mansion barn and ruined cottage. The workers moved in lines. One group shoveled. Another carried broken timber from the wreckage. Women brought coffee, bread, soup, and dry gloves. Older children watched younger ones near the mansion kitchen. Jack stood at the front window, his good hand pressed against the glass. He had tried to join them after breakfast. The doctor threatened to bind him to a chair. "You should be resting," Clara said. "They are rebuilding my home. They are clearing snow. They would not be here if I had not brought trouble to this estate." Clara moved beside him. "They are here because you once stood between them and a rotten bridge." Jack watched Matthew Ross carry a broken rafter from the cottage. "I only told them the truth. Sometimes that is what people remember longest." A wagon appeared at the lower gate. Milton Crow sat at the front beside his clerk. The wagon was loaded with flour, coffee blankets, lamp oil, and timber. Jack's face hardened. Milton entered the mansion carrying a wooden crate. He stopped when he saw Jack. For a moment, neither man spoke. Milton placed the crate on the floor, supplies for the workers. Jack looked inside. Milk tins lined the bottom. "No charge," Milton said. Jack's jaw tightened. "I pay my debts." Milton removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly. "That day in the store, I told you sorrow had no place in my ledger." Jack said nothing. Milton put his spectacles back on. "I have had time to examine my figures." Clara watched the old merchant struggle with the words. Milton looked toward Ben. "I was wrong." Jack's expression did not soften. Milton nodded toward the crate. "Then let me pay one of mine." Jack stared at him for several seconds. At last he stepped aside. "Put it in the kitchen." Milton lifted the crate again. Before leaving the hall, he looked at the dented tin beside the hearth. "You kept it." Jack followed his gaze. "I forgot to throw it away." Milton gave a small nod. "Some things survive because no one remembers to discard them." The workers cleared the cottage ruins in 3 days. Beneath the broken roof, they found Jack's hammer, Emily's silver locket, and Owen's wooden horse. One wheel had cracked again. Jack held the toy in his good hand. Clara stood beside him among the ruins. "I can repair it," he said. "You already did. I can do it again." Snow fell lightly through the open sky. Clara looked around at the men carrying timber and the women passing bowls of hot soup. "Yes," she said. "You can." The legal fight began before the ridge was fully cleared. Warren Blackwood filed a title challenge with the county court. He claimed the original Whitmore survey had placed the northern land outside Clara's estate. The filing stopped the bank from extending credit. It did not stop the workers. Samuel Price traveled to Missoula to examine territorial records. He returned with 3 survey books, 2 sealed maps, and a county clerk who remembered Warren's attorneys requesting access to the archive. The original boundary line did not cross the orchard. The copy Warren had shown Clara had been altered. Ink analysis revealed that the red mark was newer than the paper. At the public hearing, Warren sat behind a polished table with 2 attorneys. Clara sat across from him with Samuel Price. Jack remained in the rear of the courtroom with Ben asleep in his arms. The county surveyor placed the original map beside Warren's copy. The difference was clear even from the gallery. The judge looked at Warren. "Who provided this document?" Warren adjusted his cuffs. "My office received it from an independent clerk." "Name him." "I do not recall." A quiet murmur moved through the room. Then Matthew Ross stood. He testified that Warren had pressured railroad supervisors to dismiss Jack after the trestle meeting. 2 other workers followed. One produced a letter offering him permanent employment if he signed a statement accusing Jack of inciting violence. The letter carried Warren's business seal. By the end of the hearing, the title challenge was dismissed. The court referred the altered survey for investigation. Warren was not led away in chains. His defeat was quieter. The newspaper that once called Jack dangerous printed the courtroom testimony. Investors withdrew from Warren's rail proposal. Members of the town council demanded his resignation. Men who once hurried to shake his hand began crossing the street when they saw him. He left Helena before spring. The North Ridge remained Clara's. The labor lease remained valid. Work on the school resumed without bank financing. Clara sold several railroad shares to purchase lumber. Workers donated labor on Sundays. Milton provided nails at cost. Margaret Bell returned to the estate with 6 women from the Civic Society. Clara met them beside the unfinished schoolhouse. Margaret removed her gloves. "We came to sew curtains." Clara looked at the other women. "Did the society approve this? No. Then why are you here?" Margaret looked toward the children playing near the orchard. "Because silence has become uncomfortable." Clara gave her a bundle of measurements. "The nursery windows are smaller than the classroom windows." Margaret took the papers. "We will make them fit." By early summer, the schoolhouse stood beneath the northern trees. It contained 1 large classroom, a nursery, a kitchen, and a reading room warmed by a stone fireplace. Clara refused to name the building only for the Whitmore family. A carved wooden sign above the entrance read, "The North Ridge School and Nursery." Inside, 1 small brass plate honored Owen Whitmore. Another honored Emily Mercer. Clara placed Owen's books on the reading room shelves. His wooden soldiers stood in a basket near the fireplace. On the first morning, a boy with torn suspenders lifted one of the soldiers and carried it across the room. Clara's body tightened. Jack noticed. The boy placed the soldier on a windowsill and gave it a wooden block for a chair. Clara watched him carefully arrange the toy. She did not take it away. Instead, she knelt beside him. "He prefers horses," she said. The boy looked up. "Does he?" "He always did." She brought Owen's repaired wooden horse from the shelf. The boy placed the soldier on its back. Clara smiled. Outside, Jack stood among the apple trees. Green leaves covered branches that had looked dead in winter. White blossoms opened beneath the sun. Ben sat in the grass beside him, reaching for fallen petals. Jack picked up one of the petals and placed it in the child's palm. "Your mother wanted you to see this." Ben closed his fist around it. Clara approached. Jack looked toward the schoolhouse. "You did it. We did it. You sold part of your railroad holdings. They were numbers on paper. They were worth a great deal." Clara looked at the children entering the school. "So is this." By autumn, Clara had made another decision. She sold the mansion. The buyer was a territorial judge with 6 children and a wife who filled every room with noise before the sale was complete. Clara kept a smaller stone house near the orchard. It contained 4 bedrooms, a kitchen large enough for shared meals, and a porch facing the mountains. The servants worried she would regret leaving the grand house. She did not. The long dining table was moved to the school. Owen's room was emptied slowly. Clara kept his drawing, his winter coat, and 1 wooden soldier. Everything else went where children could touch it. On the final evening in the mansion, Clara walked through the empty library. The cedar sparrow sat alone on the desk. Jack entered carrying a wooden box. "You left this upstairs." He handed her Owen's silver-framed photograph. Clara took it. The house looked smaller without furniture. Jack looked toward the bare walls. It was never the furniture that made it large. She turned toward him. "And the cottage. We begin rebuilding after the harvest. You could live in the stone house." Jack's eyes held hers. For how long, Clara understood the question beneath the question. "As long as the work requires." Jack nodded. He did not ask for more. Neither did she. The orchard produced its first fruit the following September. Only 7 apples survived insects, frost, and summer hail. Jack placed them in a basket and carried them to the county office on the day his 5-year contract was reviewed. He had completed the work early. The well ran clear. The fences stood straight. The barn had been rebuilt. The soil had been restored. The orchard was alive. Samuel Price read each condition aloud. Jack listened with Ben beside him. The boy was now old enough to stand while holding the edge of the desk. When Samuel finished, Jack placed $1 silver on the document. Clara signed the deed. Then Jack signed. The clerk pressed the county seal into red wax. The land belonged to Jack Mercer. Outside wind moved through the orchard leaves. Caleb waited with Ben beneath the trees while Jack and Clara walked toward the cottage foundation. Jack carried the cedar sparrow in his pocket. He stopped beside the first apple tree he had saved. "The first time you offered me this land, I believed accepting it would make me smaller." Clara looked at him. "And now I know refusing everything is only another way pride keeps a man alone." He removed the cedar sparrow and placed it in her hand. "You gave this to me," Clara said. "I gave it to a woman who had forgotten where warmth lived." And now Jack looked toward Ben, who was trying to climb onto Caleb's boot. "Now I am asking whether she wants to live where we found it." Clara closed her fingers around the bird. Jack reached into his coat and removed Emily's silver locket. "I carried this because I thought loving anyone again would mean leaving her behind." He opened the locket. Emily's faded portrait rested inside. Clara touched the edge of the silver. "You never have to leave her behind." Jack's eyes filled, and Owen Clara looked toward the school reading room beyond the trees. "He has more people saying his name now than he ever did before." Jack breathed slowly. "The land is mine. My wages are mine. I owe you nothing." Clara's lips trembled. "So what I ask is not gratitude." He lowered himself to one knee. Ben saw him and immediately sat in the grass as well. Caleb turned away to hide a smile. Jack looked up at Clara. "Will you build the rest of this life with us?" Clara looked at the man who had entered a store carrying hunger shame and a child beneath his coat. Then she looked at Ben sitting among fallen leaves. She took the boy's hand first, then Jack's. Yes, they married beneath the apple trees the following spring. The ceremony was small. Railroad workers stood beside merchants. Mothers from the nursery sat beside women from the civic society. Milton brought pies from the mercantile kitchen. Margaret arranged wildflowers in glass jars. Caleb held Ben during the vows. Clara wore no jewels except the silver mourning pin at her throat. The cedar sparrow rested inside her bouquet. Jack carried Emily's locket in his coat. When the minister asked who gave Clara away, she answered for herself. "No one. I came here freely." Jack smiled. "So did I." Years passed. The school expanded. The orchard thickened. Ben grew tall enough to climb the same trees his father had saved. Jack became known across the county for building roofs that survived hard winters. Clara managed the school trust and taught children to read in the room named for Owen. They never became the wealthiest family in Montana. Their table was often crowded. Their door was rarely locked. Many winters later, Ben entered Crow's Mercantile with his young daughter. Above the counter inside a glass case sat the dented milk tin. Beside it rested the cedar sparrow. Jack and Clara sat near the stove, their hair silver in the firelight. The little girl pointed toward the case. "Why did Grandpa keep an empty tin?" Jack looked at Clara. She rested her hand over his. "Because once Jack said your father and I thought that tin was all we had left." Clara looked through the store window. Children crossed the snowy street carrying books from the North Ridge School. It turned out to be the first thing we shared. The girl climbed onto Jack's knee. "Were you rich then?" Jack smiled. "Clara had money." The child looked at her. "Is that not the same?" Clara shook her head. "No. What made you rich?" Outside the school bell rang. Jack's hand tightened around Clara's. She listened to the voices of children moving through the snow, having someone waiting when you come home. The girl rested her head against Jack's chest. Near the stove, the fire burned steadily. Above them, the dented tin caught the light.